Individual faculty member from ASU, and if you read my proposal and thought you have everything in there but the kitchen sink, I will have to fight you because the kitchen sink is in fact in there. You just haven't looked for it deeply enough. So three fundamental issues. I guess the indents didn't quite work. One is a combination of measures, so no one individual measure had too much weight and therefore distorted incentives too much for schools and for school districts. Second is an incentive for long-term ambitions. The example I gave is alumni measures for students after they leave elementary school. What do they do both academically and in other ways in middle school in the next couple of years? And third, some measure of citizen judgment. And the example that I highlight here is the use of grand jury mechanisms to identify schools that have particularly low performing and also high performing treatment of equal opportunity in terms of vulnerable subgroups. If you want to take a look at the mandated ingredients for achievement and growth in terms of academics, two things in my proposal. One, I leave no proficiency rate untouched. Everything gets transformed. Everything actually you can do in an Excel spreadsheet in what I propose, but it's not the specifics that matter so much as I think that you need to do some transformation. Otherwise, what we saw with the perverse incentives with proficiency rates will reoccur. Second, and this I want to highlight, is that in a couple of places, I talk about highest and lowest performing vulnerable subgroup or highest and lowest gaining vulnerable subgroup because I think schools should be given an incentive to do well with vulnerable populations and yet still be held accountable for all of them. In terms of the last required element, English language proficiency, I think access it looks to be the best assessment available, and again, I transform it for a couple of reasons. And then in terms of sort of the spices, the individual elements that aren't required, I suggest Bob Pianta's class observation instrument for primary grade instructional relationships, parent-student surveys, and again, some alumni measures. Putting it all together, I think of it as a stew for a couple of reasons. One, because of all the ingredients that go into it, but more so because a number of the measures that I propose stretch beyond 1 year. Either they are lagged measures or they require a couple years to accumulate. And I'm not sure whether or not the regulations are going to allow that. That's an open question. And with that, hungry for any additional information?
Right. Well done.
Well done, indeed. An excellent use of clip art. I'm not sure that was part of the criteria, but we like that. Tony, you go first. I know you're a huge fan of this grand jury idea, right?
Sherman, as really the champion of bad rhetoric, what makes you think that the idea of saying you're going to grand jury schools has anything positive or good to come out of it?
One, citizen judgment. No one will be able to take a look at those ratings and say it came out of a brain-dead algorithm. Two, it's an existing mechanism that's been around for a couple of centuries. Three, yes, it will be challenging to implement, but if you have it regionally within a state, some grand juries are going to do a check-off thing, and some are going to be thoughtful, and the thoughtful ones will gain attention.
So, Mike, I have to ask my other question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you'll allow.
Yep.
First of all, I think it's a regulatory mess. I think it's a statutory and regulatory mess what you're proposing. But the second thing is that you make a comment that labels aren't really for anything other than motivation.
Not.
That's what it says here, and it says there is little persuasive evidence that the form of labels has mattered much beyond that of human motivation.
We're going to disagree about issues such as A through F labeling. We're just going to disagree about it.
Well, I just wondered who goes to schools and who teaches in schools. Are they SEALs or what?
They're human beings.
Okay.
Like you and me.
Okay, I guess that was the end of that conversation. I was kind of waiting for that to go somewhere. We have established that we're not SEALs. Okay, yeah. All right,
that's fine.
That's a good way to end the argument.
I thought it was still going to go somewhere. All right, and I understand, Tony, that perhaps this notion of after the fact changing grades after the fact is something that perhaps you would have some experience with. Whoa! You brought it up earlier. He can take it. He can take it. Come on. Well, nothing compared to the Associated Press. Give me a break. All right. Okay.
Exactly.
I'm going to change the subject a little
Joanne.
bit.
Joanne.
Yes.
For those of you that don't know what we're talking about, you Google it later. Okay, Joanne, go ahead.
Exactly. But not till after I say that I actually found the grand jury thing very intriguing. I think there's something to be said around the I found it intriguing. So, but my question is, you in your presentation, you carefully glossed over a lot of the math by saying, I'm going to take these things and transform them, and then I'm going to take those things and transform them. Mm-hmm. And my question to you is, Chad gave us a proposal whose one of the core principles was simplicity, so that everybody could understand it and figure out what it meant and where it came from, and every kid knows where they stand.
Although I couldn't understand it, I have to admit.
So other than my, though, yours is sort of the opposite extreme.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that continuum and where you fall on it and why?
Okay. First of all, I don't think that Chad's proposal is as transparent as he would like. In reality, depending on state assessment systems, it's going to take a lot of translation for any particular assessment system. Secondly, all of what I propose can be looked at and examined and calculated and simulated in an Excel spreadsheet.
But what's
in reality,
the purpose? Like,
okay.
why are you
Okay.
doing the
But
transformation? What's the problem you're solving?
Okay, so let me give you an example. Trimmed means for English language proficiency. There are lots of debates about which students should be included or excluded. What a trimmed mean is it excludes the top and bottom 10 or 15% out of a range, which means we don't have to worry about those inclusion or exclusion. It still captures the central part of student performance in a school.
Okay, it is now going to be time for us to vote.
Right.
Sherman, great job. Round of applause for Sherman. Okay. Again, the system that does a lot of statistical manipulation to work out some of the issues that came up with No Child Left Behind, but also this idea of a grand jury that is going to get to look at all the evidence and help weigh in on these schools. So okay, let's see. How are we doing here? Woo! Sherman, you have pushed some buttons. This is good. I like it. But there are some that like it, a few that think it would be illegal. Okay. We have not had the illegal card thrown yet by any of the judges. We'll see if that happens here. Okay. All right. Not... okay, interesting. More hate-its than we've seen before. Okay. Let's start this time with Charlene, just for mixing things up. Okay. Charlene, what say you?
Well, gotta say I wanted to have some love for Arizona, but I hate it.
Oh, she hates it.
Specifically because as a teacher and administrator, thank you. I will figure this out eventually. As a teacher and administrator, even on an Excel spreadsheet, this sounds like a nightmare to me. Like I'd need an extra 12 hours in my week in order to do this. Although I'm intrigued by the possibilities of the grand jury in terms of maybe family, community engagement, but overall hate it.
Okay, she hates it. Andy Smerick, what are you thinking?
Okay, so I love his tweeting. Everyone should follow him on Twitter. And I hate the term grand jury as well for the same reason that Tony brought up. I love the concept of citizens getting involved in whether or not their public schools are doing what the community wants them to. So that kernel, having non-technical expert weighing in on the virtues of the schools is great. The technical problems in it are very, very complicated. And to Tony's point of the inability to be clear about what success is and definitive concern me. So overall, I'm in the like category.
I like it. Okay, very good. Joanne, go ahead.
I'm going to go next because I agree with everything Andy said,
Good.
which made me vote intriguing.
Joanne, you're not following along, huh? Oh, we had to follow your rules for years and years, but you're not going to follow mine. I see how it goes. Tony.
Sherman, let me count the ways. No ratings. I really had first of all, one of my criteria when I was going through these was it easy to explain or describe? And as a state leader, having to stand up in front of communities and try to describe an accountability system, I think you may as well be speaking Chinese. And I think the math behind it is very, very complicated. And I think, I always say if my dad doesn't understand it, it's not understandable. So, and that's not a condemnation of my dad. It's just I think we have to remember that when we do these things. So I just found this one to be far more than I could bite off.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sherman. Well done. Next up, we have Josh Boots from Empower K-12, one of the people who